Welcome to Thunder Nerds. I'm Brian Hinton.
And I'm Frederick Philip Von Weiss, and thank you for consuming the Thunder Nerds, a conversation with the people behind the technology
that love what they do
and
do tech good.
Good. Pow!
I'm
tech good.
I'm messing with Frederick there.
Hey, Brian, I think we're doing a contest right now. Is there anybody on the live chat?
And, poor Adam. Yes, the live chat, Mike Herschel and Maggie. I don't know who the Maggie I-1998 are the two winners. Oh, well. Sorry, Adam.
Well, congratulations, guys. Thanks for tuning into the show, and you've won the tickets to Front End Design Conference. Coming up when, Brian?
Oh, I'm writing something down, not paying attention.
That's okay. April 25th and 27th at the Palladium Theater in St. Petersburg. And we're going to be there. We're going to be interviewing all the speakers. We're going to have a great time. And Brian, I think we have another conference that we need to talk about.
Actually, life's textures are creating a problem right now. Give me half a second. My dog is growling at the other one. I don't want to fight to start.
And we have a dog fight. If anybody wants to bet on that, we also are taking money on the JK. Anyway, we're gonna be live at ViewConf, which is at the Star Center in Tampa, and that's between March 26th and 27th. There's March 25th which is a workshop day, but we'll be there for the 26th and 27th. We're also going to be giving away tickets to that too. So if you want to win the tickets, and it's a ticket for a full the workshop and for the conference, just go to Twitter and tweet out, "I want ACOF US ticket at Thunder Nerds." And obviously we have that on Twitter, and you'll see it in the show notes. So take a look at that, and I hope you could join us and be at the ViewConf, and it's going to be pretty awesome. Last thing, we have a sponsor. We have Pantheon. Pantheon provides services for WordPress, Drupal 7, Drupal 8. They have a test, live, and dev environment, so you could easily collaborate with your team. You could commit your changes to the site without pushing stuff that you haven't tested first with everybody. So it's a really great piece of software. Check it out at pantheon.io. Now, with all that being said, and without any further ado, we'll welcome our guest. We have Design Director at Big C, Adriana Generallo. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I unfortunately actually I got attacked by my dog, Frederick. So
did you really? Did you get bit?
Yeah, a little bit nicked. So I had to put the other one in the other room.
Oh man, well, that's karma, I guess.
What?
I also.
So sorry, Adriana. I didn't mean.
No, that's okay. If it makes you feel any better, I also got bit by my dog this morning. So I'm with you. Yeah, it's a pretty regular.
Weird.
Yeah, it's a regular thing, right?
Yeah,
and you have a Chihuahua, right?
Yes. So I think that kind of, explains the attitude. I think they're known to be quite, finicky, aggressive. And she's a rescue. So she was on the streets of Sebring for 2 years. And then she was going to be put down for fear aggression. And we adopted her through an organization in St. Pete who specifically deals usually with older Chihuahuas, but she was 2 when we adopted her, and she was going to be put down. So they went and they got her from Sebring. They put her on Facebook, and my wife and I were not in the market for a dog at that moment, or a smaller dog like that, or one who needed a lot of extra care, but just something, those things happen. And we said, "Oh my God, Did you see that dog?" And we had to have her, and that was 2 years ago, and she's drawn blood quite a few times since then, but we love her anyway. So
that's wonderful. They're my favorite dogs. I had 2 of Chihuahuas, Nina and Jerome, and they were the best. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I love them so much.
Well, see, mine is just starting to growl at the other dog, and I'm sure it's a territorial type thing, but I'm doing everything that's been recommended because what you're supposed to do is train them very strictly and establish that you're the alpha and not them, and they shouldn't be growling, don't need to be territorial because
that's right.
And it's kind of working. It's gotten better, but the problem is she growls, and then the other dog just attacks her, like goes right at her. And that our other dog Zora, she's actually like, we've had friends' dogs who she's like they had to get stitches because
no.
Oh, and she's a wonderful dog. Just she's very, if there's any aggression, she's a defender. She'd be good if someone was in the house for sure. But
yeah. Are you using the Cesar Millan method, or is this your aside another method?
I don't know the terminology of what it is. It's based on we know someone in Orlando who professionally trains this, and they've just been giving us tips.
Yeah, it sounds like Cesar, where you have them walk behind you, not in front of you, to show that you're alpha.
I do all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I read a couple books when we got her, and now recently I say to her, just as it's really for myself, but I'll say if she goes to nip me, I'm like, I am your master, you are my dog. And obviously she doesn't know, but it's just to hype myself up, because if I didn't do it, I'm like, oh my God, don't bite me. And then like she doesn't go out because I can't put a leash on her. So yeah, I completely subscribe to that idea of like, you've got to assert your alpha, but it's hard.
Yeah, you're projecting out, even if you're saying it, and like you said, she doesn't understand it, obviously, but you're projecting that outward, and she understands that maybe those feelings, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, exactly. We hope.
So Adriana, let's jump into a little bit more about you. Where are you actually from? Because I see that you studied abroad. You studied in the UK, right?
Well, I was working there, and that was right after I finished school. So originally I'm from South Florida, and then I went to Orlando. I went to undergrad there. So I went to UCF. And then from there, I went to Valencia. At the time, it was a community college for design, and it's since become a college. And then after I left there, I had met at the job. Have you guys ever heard of Buca di Beppo, or been to a Buca di Beppo? It's an Italian. Ooh, fancy. Is that a mimosa? The Bellini? What's happening? What's going on?
No, it's a Harvey Wallbanger. So it's if you know what that is. Yeah.
No, but I've heard of it in TV shows.
So it's like a screwdriver, except with a licorice liqueur in it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Yeah, it looks nice. So when I was working at Buca, I was a server, and the owner of Buca, his name's Robert Earl, and he owns Buca and Planet Hollywood and Earl of Sandwich. And he's from London originally. So my best friend and I were going to design school. We worked at Buca together, and we were put on his section. And whenever he would come in, because he lived by our particular location, so he would come in, and he was really eccentric, and he would wear really loud paisley shirts. And he was the kind of person who you're serving him, and he would be like, so what's your story? And you're like, I don't know. But ultimately, I don't know how it happened. I think it was Katrina, my friend, who really kind of drove this. She told him we're in school for design. And so we showed him our portfolio, and he gave us internships at the corporate office for Buca. So it was really great. So we were still in school, and then we were getting paid, and it was $15 an hour, which is like really good for an internship. Like anywhere, I feel like even today that would be good. And we were interning there during the day, and then we would work at the restaurant at night. So it was this kind of, very, in all the different worlds at the same time. And when I finished school, I had the opportunity to go to England, and I didn't know anyone. And so I emailed him and said, hey, you're British, I'm going to England. Is there anything that you can, do you know anything? You're the only British person I know. And so he essentially, probably strong-armed the agency who runs Planet Hollywood in London, because he was their client. So he was, from what in hindsight, they were not looking to hire. They didn't have the money to hire, but he was probably a high-profile client and said, you're going to hire this girl. And so he was my only connection, and it really worked out. And I lived there for a couple of years and worked at that agency. And so I didn't study there, but in the sense of really learning about what it is to work at a design agency, it was really great experience. And the parallels of that dynamic, because it was two friends from college who started, their name is Newell and Potter. And it was the two of them, a senior designer, myself. And when I left, they had a contractor working for them, but it was really small. And when I moved to St. Pete, I started working for Think Tank. And that was two friends who started a small agency, and there were 5 of us. So it was a really easy transition, and a lot was learned at that time at Newell and Potter that I brought with me. So it worked out really well.
So was you classified yourself at one point as a surface designer. Is that when did you specialize in that specifically? Was that in college? Was that in your internships?
Yeah, did you pick that up in Europe?
It's exactly where I picked it up, actually, because we had a client called, if you've ever been to the UK or anywhere, and I don't know how far reaching it is, but there's a grocery store called Tesco, and it's a chain sort of like Publix. And so there was a contract where we were doing patterns for these bags that would go in Tesco. And we were using a freelancer who was exclusively a surface designer, a pattern designer. And eventually she became too expensive. And I had expressed interest to my boss, like, oh, this looks really fun. Maybe I could, just asking him questions. So when she became too expensive, they said, well, why don't you have a crack at it? And I did. And we didn't really express that to the client that we were doing that. It wasn't duplicitous. It was just sort of, we didn't go out of our way to say anything, and they didn't know any different. So that to me was a pivotal moment of a confidence boost, that if the client couldn't tell that the work I was doing wasn't different from the work as this, certified pattern designer, then clearly maybe I could pursue it. So it started there.
Now, could you pause maybe for a second and kind of give us a brief overview of what exactly a surface designer does? It's actually a term that I hadn't actually heard of, and I love patterns myself, and I constantly am drawing, taking pictures of patterns. I'm a big fan of them.
Oh,
but
cool.
I feel like it's more than that, but could you elaborate what exactly a surface designer is?
Yes. So essentially, everything that you encounter, from your shower curtain to a tea towel to wallpaper, anything that has a pattern on it, whether it's a traditional repeat or if it's just a single layout that's not really repeated, all of that would constitute surface design, because it's as literal as you can get, really. It's just what is going on the surface of anything. If it's a table, a placemat on a table, or a rug, as or maybe not a rug, but that's more textile. But regardless, it's just anything that goes on any surface. It's so broad. So there's a lot of opportunity if it's something that interests you, for you to find your way. There's a huge market for children's clothing and anything, their blankets, where people specialize in children's patterns. And if that's your niche, then you can really have a whole career that is just around that. So it's broad in that sense, which is great.
It's interesting how the serendipity of the situation provided that opportunity for you. And now that's one of the, I'm assuming one of the main passions you have, right?
Yeah, it is still. And it's funny because it started waning a little bit, not in the sense of the passion. The passion is still there, but I started not being able to understand where that would fit into, what would I do with that? The more I learned and the more I became conscious of a footprint, an environmental footprint, and I watched this one documentary that kind of changed everything. If you've heard of, it's called The True Cost. And it deals with the textile industry. And what I really loved doing was patterns that could be in fashion, but it was kind of not aligned with who I am as a person, and people can change and things can, it's not like you're a fixed person, but I'm not a super high fashion person. I don't keep up on trends. I don't particularly care. So for that to be the art I was drawn to wasn't really, it wasn't meant to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then learning more about the fashion industry, that I was like, well, what, you know, how many new things do we really need? So the passion is still there. It's just hard for me to find a place where I have a drive to create new things. I feel like I'm a huge secondhand shopper. I'm a huge thrifter. I like to recycle things until they're just telling me like, you've got to throw me out at this point. So for me to find a thing that actually needs to be new in the world is hard. It doesn't really line up with surface design, but I still love it. And it was something that I felt was, you know, I felt at home designing patterns. So it's a weird juxtaposition.
Yeah, maybe you could take your love for, you know, timelessness and pursue the vintage patterns and the like. But
yeah.
But what? So you discovered surface design, and now you're at Big C. What led to that transition? I would say, in some ways, it's a pretty big change from, you know, something that is someone wears is on the wall, is in, you know.
Well, because you did study with traditional graphic design and design, right? So that
I did.
Yeah, but the transition from that to something that's Big C is kind of a marketing design agency. What led to that? Yeah, that's what I'm curious.
Well, and if it's a transition or if it's a parallel.
Yeah. Well, it was happening. It was happening at the same time. So when I knew that I would be moving from London, my now wife, she lived in St. Pete and she works at Kawa Coffee, so she has kind of an ear out, you know. And I would tell her like, hey, let me know if you hear of anything, if anyone's looking for anything. And so she really is the one who connected me with the guy who was doing freelance, and then he became more full-time with Think Tank. Think Tank was a similar agency to Big C, but much younger. And so I started working with Think Tank, and I was a designer. And then we hired another designer, so that inherently made me a lead designer. And then we hired someone like an intern, and now I'm the creative director. So it was sort of like this, well, I guess you're more senior, so you should really have this title thing. And it felt a little like not authentic. And it's not a matter of being like overly humble. It just felt like kind of just how it happened. It wasn't like I walked in and I was like, I'm interviewing for the creative director position. It just sort of happened. And then when we merged with Big C a few years ago, they didn't have a creative director. So it just carried over. And then as I progressed and working directly under Andy now, who I know has been on the show before too, you know, she helped mold my role and mold my trajectory more because she had more experience in the design, in the agency world. And she was just able to direct me a bit more. And so I grew over time into the position and inhabited that position in a more authentic way. And then by the time we merged with Big C, I had just kind of let go of surface design. So I had been waking up early and creating my portfolio for surface design. And I signed on with 2 studios to do freelance. And I think, you know, 3 weeks after I watched that documentary, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm quitting now. And it was kind of crazy. My wife was like, I feel like you've been doing this portfolio creation for your surface design for literally 2 years for this express purpose. And then you got what you wanted, and then you've quit within a month of doing it. But sometimes you just know and it's really an easy decision, even though it doesn't seem like it should be. So that's how it happened.
Do you still play around with that though? I know like you do what you do as far as design in the agency realm, but do you also still play around with pattern design, or rather, surface design?
Well, I don't create things that I take into that I make into patterns. As much as I create more, I've gotten much more interested in watercolor painting, and not in a way that I'm a fine artist who's a representational painter, but in a way that's very loose. And I think if I wanted to, I could take those patterns, I could take those designs and make them into a pattern if I had a reason to. But I've just sort of stopped at the painting part. And so I've gotten much more engaged in that and just being a little bit more loose and free. And so to be honest, I've pretty much completely dropped pattern design in a functional way, but not emotionally. I still love it. And I'm open. I like to keep my mind open. Like one day there might be this perfect reunion with pattern. I just need it to feel like it's purposeful. So.
Well, you know, it could be the same thing where you had that serendipitous moment where you had that encounter, a little bit of networking, and you start a different journey. And I think we all have several of those throughout our lifetime. So who knows what can happen.
Exactly. And I love, like, you know, I love it so much for what it is. I think patterns make people happy. They do brighten up an otherwise, you know, maybe boring surface. It's just a matter of feeling aligned with what you're doing. And that totally could happen again in the future, and we'll just see. But for now, yeah, I'm kind of just waiting.
So what are you doing now as far as design? Like, we want to know what is your title now, and what are you doing at Big C, and what's kind of like your day to day?
So we recently changed my title from creative director to design director, and it was obviously conscious. And the reason behind it was that typically on a day-to-day, I get really into the nitty-gritty details of the design, whether it's probably a website, maybe some other digital experience, but a creative director, you know, Andy and I were talking about it, is they're operating on this sort of higher aerial perspective where they're truly taking higher level concepts and saying, you know, you should, you know, ideating on things that are a bit more broad. And I can't seem to help myself but to get really ingrained in the details of things. So I don't really have the capacity, even if I wanted to grow the proper skill set to be an actual creative director. And it wasn't a situation where it felt like a demotion or anything negative. It was just, you know, hypothetically, if Big C grows and in 2 years, 3 years, we're in a position where we really need a creative director, and there's this person who would be perfect, but we say, oh, we've got this creative director already, and we're not going to fire her, and we're not going to demote her. And we cut ourselves off from the opportunity to have a true creative director because I'm filling this role, but I'm not really doing what a creative director does. So it was a conscious sort of changing of a role to be more appropriate to what I do, because there are 2 designers on my team, and we do work closely, whether I'm the lead on a project or Kevin or Rich are the lead designer on the project. We'll do peer reviews and we get really nitty gritty. So a design director feels like a better title. So
you really want to get your hands per se into it and really do a lot of the design.
Yeah, and I can't seem to help myself in getting, I don't consider it bogged down, so I wouldn't put it that way, but if something doesn't seem like it's making sense, I will chase that and go to the account manager, and if she doesn't know, I'll go to the content strategist, and if she's not sure, then I'll just say, hey, I don't want to step on any toes, can I just call the client, and I'll get on the phone. So I can't seem to break myself of that habit. And when I look back on my time at Big C and at Think Tank, it's really served me, and it served the company to embrace that about myself. So I can't really, I don't envision myself really being able to inhabit this role where I'm out of that and I'm more, you know, kind of seeing I'm not great at big picture thinking. I'm really good at, like, medium level thinking and then better at honing in and like executing things. So.
And there's definitely a place for that. That's a very important thing. I mean, sometimes as a creative director, that honing in is probably one of the most important things that you can do in your job on a day-to-day. Like when everyone else is trying to look at everything, you're like, hey, what about that one spot? But not to go too off the beaten path of or the track we're on, we do have a question in the chat. Back to Surface, related for surface design. They want to know, how does the surface that you're designing for affect your design process and the limitations that you have in your style?
I would say, so knowing what you're designing for is good because it affects scale. So if you were, and you can still like, say you were taking a really large surface and comparatively large, so maybe a shower curtain is kind of large compared to maybe a dress. And so you would want to consider the dimensions, because then your repeat, what the section is that you take and then you repeat, will change, and how far zoomed in you are will change. But you can also just consciously choose to do something, a really tight-knit pattern. So in the fashion world, a really tight-knit pattern is called a Ditsy Print. And so if you've seen like dresses or shirts where the flowers, they're typically flowers, they could be something else, are really small, and you don't really see the detail of what it is until you zoom in. That's considered a Ditsy Print. So
where's that term come from?
I don't know. It is a bit, yeah, now I'll have to look it up. But you could
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll let you know. You could consciously decide like, oh, I'm going to do a Ditsy print for a shower curtain, but it also might not be the best idea because it just doesn't suit the environment. When you go to IKEA or Target or wherever and you look at the shower curtain designs, they're typically pretty big. So I would say that when you get a brief for what you're designing for, you would definitely just do your basic research of what is out there in the world. And you can choose to break those rules. But what I found was that when I broke those rules, I reached out to a designer who was established in, I just said, I would love any of your feedback on my portfolio. I just am very open to critique. And she said, I think your designs are great, but they're almost too, they're not marketable as what's out there. So I would say that when thinking of what to design for a pattern, it's unfortunate, but you have to kind of consider how marketable this thing needs to be. And the more abstract or the more artsy, it's very subjective, obviously, the more you restrict the marketability, which is unfortunate, which is also probably, a negative tick in surface design world to a point.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I have a feeling that at some point we're gonna have to get together and tell me all about patterns, because I like.
Oh yeah, I'd love to.
I love it more from an appreciative sense. I could probably talk this whole show about it, but
that's awesome.
Do you bring that? Obviously we keep going back to this subject. Do you find a way that you bring that into your work, or is that kind of the way you were talking about how you're very detail centric, you're very detailed focused? Like that, to me, like the way you explain the patterns and surface design, it seems very similar.
Well, I think that it has allowed me to be a little bit more unique in some of the treatments of, I'm thinking of websites that I've worked on, in which if they already come to us with a brand and they have the ability for me to take assets from their brand and make a pattern, I will. And I try to be conscious about not doing it to the point where it's just like, oh, that's the thing. And so it has to make sense. But I think that's a really useful way to bring in something that I've been very passionate about into a more digital and, maybe unexpected area. And it's not to say patterns on websites are unexpected or, this new thing, but I do find myself seeing, it's very obvious to me when I look at a job like, oh yes, I could bring in a pattern here, or I can make this texture. So I think it has influenced the way I approach certain certain sites. And I think it's given me a little bit of just a wider toolkit, a broader toolkit in that sense.
Do you design and develop, or are you more the design kind of person?
I'm more of the design, and I really do try. I have a horrible memory, but I really do try to retain everything that I learned through different projects when dealing with developers, because we work really closely together. But even just today, I told one of our developers, she's relatively new to Big C, and so I like to keep communication super, super open. So we were talking about a site, and she's like, well, I could just do a class. Do you want me to just do that? And I was saying, you know, that sounds good. I understand what that means, totally. But I lean on you to, like, if that's what we should do, then that's what we should do. When you're asking me, like, I could do this, like, I want you to do what you do best, and I'll do what I do best. And we can, you just kind of have to learn how people communicate, especially when they're new. So what we came to was her saying, I could do this, was her way of saying that's what we should do. But it's interesting having to work out those communication nuances to make sure you're speaking the same language. But the point of the story is to say, I don't want to pretend I know more than I know, because that's when things go really sideways. So I know a little bit, but I certainly don't code, but I know enough to reference things to make things efficient. I'm not like completely unaware of coding things, but yeah, I would say I'm strictly design in that sense.
See, that's an awesome thing to hear. So many times from people who lead, they don't realize their own shortcomings, and they tend to speak around their inabilities or their lack of knowledge. And you recognize that, hey, I don't know this, you do. You know enough that you can talk through it, but you don't make assumptions or like guess. You just outright say, hey, I don't know this, you do. If that works, okay.
and that's why people need people. You have to be able to, like you said, Brian, know your shortcomings and be able to say, okay, you know how to do that, you know how to do that. We all come together, and that's what makes a team.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of want to move forward towards something I found. If it's okay, do you have anything else, Frederick?
Plenty, but please go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to move towards something I found, a quote I found in your website, your blog, actually, I believe it was. I loved the quote, and I want to read it out loud because it's beautiful in a lot of ways. It's I find inspiration in the story behind an idea. My most successful designs start by imagining the small details of the person who would connect with my prints. Since the story is such a strong part of my inspiration process, I believe we can use our imaginations to create new and unique stories through design. I just really like that quote. It was very beautiful. Is that a self? Did you write that yourself, or was that reference from something, or what was?
Yeah, I mean, I did write it myself. It's I'm trying to think back to when I exactly wrote that, but I remember the frame of mind, and I remember what I was referencing. But yeah, I did write that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
But along those lines, and we keep coming back to service design because I think it's a big part of your story. And we've talked about the path you've taken from service design to design director now, and talked a little bit about the struggles along the way. I'd like to know, like, some advice you might give yourself, knowing how you've succeeded now. Like, if you were to go back to yourself and the journey that you took, what would you tell yourself? And along the same lines, what advice would you give others in relation to your journey and what they might be experiencing?
I think that, in hindsight, I wouldn't have changed anything. So I'm thinking through the process that I went through, and I'm thinking about the fact that ultimately I kind of walked away from it. And I think maybe someone might look at that and say, okay, well, maybe your advice should be, don't waste your time. You're going to walk away. But I wouldn't say that. I would say that the only advice I would give myself is to say, enjoy it more, which I think I did. I don't remember really having a stressful experience around it, but I think it is really important, regardless of if you ultimately walk away from something. I think it's so important to go through the process of it, like waking up early every morning before work to design patterns, to put on my portfolio, to create my website, to put it out there, to email the studios, to think about, you know, I created these scarves out of using this website called Spoonflower, where you upload designs and you make fabric. And then I had my colleague, who's our director of operations at Big C. She's a seamstress. So she sewed the edges of these silk scarves, and I had my patterns on them. And my whole plan was to send them to studios. I didn't even end up doing that. And then I was going to sell them, and I like kind of sold some, but like I didn't really ultimately do it. But it didn't feel like a failure. It felt like just something you do, and you feel good about doing it. So I think my only advice would be, hey, just recognize that you're doing this and you should enjoy it. And if you find yourself not enjoying it, or you find yourself feeling a little stressed, just remember what you're doing this for, not for this end goal, but you're doing it to explore what you might be really into. And I'm still really into it, and I don't do it. So that seems a bit weird. Like, if you're really into it, you should do it. Maybe not so. Like, my advice to me then would be that. And my advice to anyone, regardless if they're getting into surface design, they're getting into any sort of design or anything, is to really understand why you're doing something, so that while you're doing it, you really love it and you're really enjoying it. And then the more you love it and the more you enjoy it, the less important whatever your goal is, because ultimately things don't always work out. Bad things happen to good people. There are disappointments, like all of this stuff happens. And if you're so fixated on like, I'm waking up every morning, I'm doing this, I have to get this thing. If I don't get this thing, it's all for, if that's your attitude, it's going to be really disappointing. Maybe not this time, but maybe next time, or maybe in 5 years. Like, you're going to have to eventually learn that the goal is not necessarily the goal.
Maybe it's not about optimizing your time. It's about, smelling the roses kind of thing, like having the time and building those experiences and learning from life experiences. Maybe you might not use it in one way, but you'll definitely use it in another.
Absolutely. And I think that, being, like you said, the smelling the roses, like being present while you're doing it is so important. Like, understanding that what you're doing is because you enjoy it. I mean, is it not? If it's not, then stop doing it. Like, absolutely just stop. If you're having a bad day, that's one thing. But if you find yourself going through these motions to just do it because that's what you think you should do, that needs to be acknowledged and recognized, so that you can kind of move through that and move on to the thing that you literally lose yourself in because you just love doing it. It might never amount to anything, but that's so much more fulfilling in the long run.
Yeah, I like that. Lose yourself in it. Yeah, it's about the journey and then self-discovery.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Do you mind if I kind of rewind and switch up just a little bit? I'd really like to, and I'd feel bad if I didn't get a chance to ask you this. If we could look back at when we were talking about your current career, and I was wondering if you had any advice that you would be able to provide for junior designers coming up as a design director, and maybe junior designers that have the aspiration to move forward in their career. What maybe to become a design director? What would you tell them?
I would say to be honest with what you know and what you don't know, so that you can acknowledge where you need to work on, like what you need to work on. So I would also recognize not, pulling long nights or early mornings to learn what you don't know. If you're at a job or you're at an internship, you're still in school and you're at an internship or whatever, and you sense that there are things that you think you should know and it's making you a little anxious, like, oh, I'm not learning about this. Start making a list. Literally make a list of all the things you hear people saying. Keep your ears super open. My one boss, Zooey, jokes with me because at Think Tank, you know, back in the old days, I would have my headphones on, but then the music would stop and I would just leave them on. And if someone started talking and they started talking about a project I was working on, I would like pipe up and think, oh, well, you know, what are you talking about? So he would always do these like fox ears things like, oh, she's always listening. But I think it's important. I think that you should always have your ears open. It doesn't mean you need to go get involved in that conversation. It doesn't mean you have to involve yourself, but keep your ears open to everything that's going on, because I was just talking to one of our developers today about developing this kind of holistic thinking and how it's a skill to learn how to prioritize things, learn how to say, okay, this site is about to launch, so all of the tasks I have to do for that launch are the most important. But you might have 5 tasks that take you 10 minutes each, that if you could get those out of your column, you know, we work in Trello, so if you can get those out of your Trello column, that will give you a morale boost to carry on with this thing that's really important, because you're getting stuff done. And you have to learn, and that's why it's a skill, you have to learn how to discern between what's a priority in one regard and what's a priority in another regard, and how do they play with one another. Keep your ears open, listen to what are your account managers worried about, what do they think is high priority, what is giving them anxiety, so how can you help them get their task done so that they can be alleviated. Like it's a much more holistic thing than being like, oh, I'm just a developer and I'm just doing my things, I'm just doing my development, or I'm just a designer and I got my like, you can have your headphones on, but make yourself available to take in the whole office, to understand what is needed of you. And if you as a junior designer can develop the skill of sort of not making assumptions, but preempting what people might need, because you start learning the rhythms of these projects and the rhythms of the office, that is such an invaluable skill that is not taught in school, and it's not taught at work necessarily. Like, you need to acknowledge that that's a skill that you can develop, and develop it yourself. And when people see that you can develop a sense of reading people, reading clients, reading design briefs, seeing it from a 360 point of view, that is so invaluable that you could be like a pretty good designer. But if you have that, you are invaluable. And you'll get better at designing, because you just get better, because it's just what happens. There are so many things I look at nowadays where I'm like, oh my God, I designed that? That's so embarrassing that that's like something I designed. But I'm still proud of myself because I think I'm a good worker. But I can look at plenty of things I've designed and be like, oh, that's kind of cringeworthy. But moving on, you know?
It's always hard for your taste to catch up with your skill when you first start off.
Oh my gosh, yes.
If you put the time in, you'll get there, like you said.
That's like, have you heard that This American Life?
I was thinking that, because that's what I heard. I keep hearing maybe it was Chris Coyier was talking about that on Shop Talk just the other day, and I was listening to that episode and he was quoting him.
Yeah,
I missed it. What is
go ahead.
You made us just take a drink. That's funny.
Sorry. Okay. It's a really great. They've made it into a video on YouTube, and I don't remember where it was actually, like what its original air date was, but Ira Glass, who hosts This American Life, has this great monologue where he talks about how horrible he was when he first started out and how that's okay. And I think he said he was horrible for like 7 years in his estimation. He probably wasn't that bad for that long, but it makes you feel so much better, because he was basically saying, you know, just what Frederick was saying, that you get to a point where you understand, you just, in the beginning, you're idolizing everything. You think everything's amazing and you could never be that good. And then you start seeing like, okay, I have some skill, but I'm really lacking still. And you understand that your taste is so high, but your ability isn't quite there yet. And that's so important. And you could, you know, take that and be embarrassed by it, or it could stunt you because you can't move through that. But eventually, you know, like Frederick was saying, you practice and it just happens. Like the part of your skills being honed, it's going to happen, especially if you're in school and you've got structure around you, you've got projects to do, you will inherently get better. If you're at work, you don't want to, you're going to have to keep doing your job. So you will just inherently get better. It's going to happen.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes. But yeah, it's like the what is it? The 10,000 hours rule. You put 10,000 hours into anything, and you become a master at it. something like that. Yeah, it's about putting the work in, and you'll get there.
Yeah, and everyone has those. What is it? The imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Yes.
Yeah, which I think is a big thing in the industry, and I know quite a few people who go into bouts of depression about it, myself included. Sometimes I'll because of where I work, it's very enterprisey. It's not flashy. You don't. When you click a button to log in, there's no like spinny thing that comes in and something fades in the top, and then a bat flies through the scene, and it's very functional. It needs to work, and I think that especially people who work in a similar industry, there's a lot of people out there that work in enterprise because it's necessary, and it's more about the overall experience and not about the flash. And when I look personally, and see like Go and Dribble, and you see like the crazy animations, I'm like, I don't want to do that, and it'd be great to do that, but it just doesn't work in the same environment. And
not everybody that's a designer has that kind of visual design portfolio. A lot of times it's about the problem solving, and you can't really show the problem solving sometimes on Dribble.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. What would you say to people that and I really you speak perfectly, very eloquently, very like, I love everything that you've been saying. You're very clearly a leader. It really comes across. So I'm curious what you would say to people who do feel that way. I think it's important for someone in your position to be like, hey, if you feel that way.
Are you thinking of a imposter syndrome?
Yes.
So I think that if you're feeling this sense of imposter syndrome, then you might be spending too much time focused outward. You might be focusing a little too much on the comparison. And it's so easy to do. We're essentially conditioned to compare ourselves to other people. So it's not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed of. It's something we all do all the time to varying degrees. So I think the remedy to that is to cultivate some practices that are really focused on yourself. And that doesn't have to be, it could take many forms. So for myself, I have a meditation practice. Some people have a yoga practice. Some people have a skateboarding practice. Some people have a rock climbing. Like it doesn't have to be any sort of woo-woo thing. It can be the thing that makes you feel authentically yourself. And it doesn't at all have to relate to what you do for work. I think it's really crucial to deal with it on a fundamental basis. So better it not have to do with work, and just sort of get into this practice, like put that to the side for a minute, put aside, I feel imposter syndrome at work because this designer is so much more skilled than me. My lead designer, Rich, he's great. He's awesome. He probably has like 5 years on me as far as in the industry doing things. Like there are things he does design-wise that are better than me. And I love that because he's on my team and I have no ego about that. And I will tell him like, hey, like come in, like quality control me because I'm really deadline focused. So like, am I being lazy here? Like come in and just like referee my design right now. So, I don't know that I would be able to be at that point with him or with anyone who I feel is technically has more years on me, more experience on me. If I hadn't done personal work on myself that has nothing to do with work. Because you lose your sense of ego a little bit when you do work on yourself and you understand who you are and your own value. And that sounds really like sappy and not necessarily related
it's
to
absolutely
work.
Honest. You're right. You're dead on.
Yeah. I mean, myself, I read. I've always been an avid reader, like my entire life. Since I was a little kid, I was reading nonstop, and I still do that. I always make a point too, and I tell people this all the time. And in our industry, it's particularly bad. People will read books about the industry. That's all they'll read. You'll see on you'll see on their website this list of all these books related to their field. I'm like, go get like something else. Like I'm reading the library.
Read Harry Potter if you need to.
Harry Potter.
Your passion.
I'll admit I've reread Harry Potter quite a few times because it's like
nothing wrong with that. Harry Potter's awesome.
No, it's like, to me, it's like an old, like a classic movie, like Goonies or Back to the Future. Yeah, you just pull it out, and you don't have to read the whole
Or Back to the Future.
Casablanca.
You said classic movie. I love Casablanca. It's an awesome movie.
All right.
Sorry. Is that bad?
No, not at all. Casablanca.
No, authentic. Be authentic to you.
Yes, be authentic.
Yeah.
What else you got? What else?
By the way, do you have any kind of a website or not website? Excuse me. Do you have like a YouTube channel or a podcast that you do? Because if you don't, you really need to.
Oh, thanks. No, I don't. I've thought about doing Rich and I. We had this really ambitious idea that never happened, where we would interview each other as Big C people. So every year we do something called Ship a Day.
We know it, yeah.
Oh yeah, of course, you know. And 2 years
because of Autumn with her podcast.
Yes, that's right. And I love that the cubicle. She is part of her Ship It. I find myself sequestered up in that cubicle. It was supposed to be like this place where you went to play with Play-Doh and color and stuff, which it still is. And it has little like sculptures that are nice. It's awesome. It's supposed to be this sort of retreat space, but I've kind of commandeered it as my personal office. Because it's helpful. We work in such an open office space that sometimes you really need to focus. And I need that cubicle life. And who would have thought? But that can be really helpful. But anyhow, we had this idea to interview one another and have this sort of side website where you could learn more about people behind. It was going to be called like Under the Sea or under something.
Oh no!
I love that idea. No, I love that.
Maybe that's not it. Maybe it was Beneath the Surface. I think it was Beneath the Surface.
I like that better.
I want Under the Sea. I want Under the Sea.
We might have to resurrect it on a Ship a Day because we have like Adam, whom also has been on your show. He developed the page. I mean, it's almost there. It just
Dude,
never
I need
got
that.
off
I
the
need
ground.
Under the Sea.
It should do like a quarterly Under the Sea type deal. Like you interview everyone, like what's going on, and then like next quarter you do it again, and that'd be nice.
Something a little bit more manageable.
But to get off the topic of the name, all joking aside, I really think you need a YouTube channel and or a podcast because I want to hear a lot more from you.
Quit pushing her. Maybe she doesn't want to.
No, she's gonna do it.
I want to know. Did you get one? Did you get the Big C tattoo too?
I didn't. That's so funny. Did you? Yeah. No, I don't blame you for asking at all. You know.
I just wanted to know because I saw it in the Times. Yeah.
I was. Oh my gosh! I was walking to. I don't know. Oh, I don't know. That it really took on a life of its own, I will say. Yeah. But I was walking with Zooey, and he was like, "Yeah," because we were walking out of the office to get coffee, and our office manager did like a nice little frame up of the article. And I thought, oh, that's so cool. It looks nice. And blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh yeah, you're so jealous. You're not part of it. And I took a half day that day. So I was there for all of the hype of, you know, oh my gosh, are we going to do this? Should we do this? Who's down? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, in two minds, I'm thinking, I mean, like, do I not want one? I'm leaving for a half day. So it's kind of not an issue.
Was there drinking involved in this?
There wasn't.
Because I always feel like tattoos, drinking.
No, but the energy of it was very like akin to being high on something. Like it just sort of was one of those like wildfire moments where everyone was like, should it? Yes, it became like that. But honestly, if I had gotten one, I wouldn't have gotten it on my wrist or ankle. I probably would have gotten it on my side. And then we thought, well, thank God that didn't happen because that would have been a really awkward picture. Like I wouldn't have been able to be like, I don't know how that would have been photographed. So I don't know that I would have ended up in the Times article regardless.
As long as it wasn't like your lower back, I think even your side would be a lot better than that.
Hey, Abe, we're running out of time, and I really want to see Penny.
Oh, okay. Well, she came in.
Where's Penny? No, I don't see her.
Hold on. Do you see her?
Oh, there we go.
Oh, can you pick her up? I want to see her.
Oh my
Penny. Did you see that evil face?
and then Penny bites her. And then Penny bites her.
Cute face.
Do you see her?
Not. Aw.
That's a cutie.
The face she's giving right now is like, what are you about to do? Because I will bite you if I'm not into it.
Aw. I'd let her bite me.
I still want to ask my final question.
Yeah, please go ahead, Brian.
My spotlight question, if you've ever listened to the show, it's to kind of get to know everyone on the show. It's a group question. It's a personal question. It's
Chocolate.
Very simple.
You can answer already.
That would be an interesting answer for the question. The question is, and I'll go first. It's, what do you want people to feel when they're around you? Mine would be comfortable, relaxed. Frederick. As he drinks a drink.
Jeez, what people feel around me?
Yeah, what do you want people to feel when they're around you?
Yeah, Brian, I don't know about that one.
Chocolate?
Chocolate? Sorry, man, that's really general.
What?
I love your questions, but like that's really general. I have no idea. I'm gonna say Christmas.
What? I think this is a very specific. I feel like this is
all right. I will give your question some serious thought. What do I want people to feel when they're? How do I want to be perceived? Is that the?
How do you want people to feel? Do you want them to feel angry when they're around you? Happy, anxious?
Well, I think the thing is, though, I think everybody would want people to feel comfortable and happy when they're around.
Not necessarily.
Really?
Sometimes I want people, like when I'm in general, I want people to feel comfortable and relaxed. But when I'm in certain moods, I want them to feel afraid and run away because I want to be alone.
let me answer that then the most authentically I can, Brian. I want people to be happy, and I want to be able to provide happiness and joy to the ones I love.
Making my question complicated. Okay, your turn.
I think, well, the first thing I thought as soon as you answered it was joyful. And then the second thing I thought was inspired.
See, well done.
See how easy that was?
I'm not as smart as her, obviously, Brian. That's why I said she needs a podcast and a YouTube channel.
Yeah, too many.
That was a really well answered, really good question. Answer to the question.
Yeah. I'm gonna.
The Galliano starting to take effect.
So, any final words for our audience? Any words of wisdom?
Oh dear. Oh my! Penny just growled.
That's your words.
Don't make Penny angry.
Yeah, don't cross her. Oh goodness. Well, I can't say that I do. I have a quick question. This is not a word of wisdom at all. This is like a really side quick question because you said you loved books, and I was curious. Have you ever read any Tom Robbins?
Sounds familiar.
Okay, well, write that down if you are a book lover. And I mean, I have this pin on right now, and it says "Books change lives." So I am a fellow reader and lover of literature. And if you've not read any Tom Robbins, you must. So maybe that's my word of wisdom.
Oh yes, I have. I've read "Still Life with Woodpecker." That was fantastic.
This quote.
I've tried reading.
Yep.
I've tried reading his other books.
Oh gosh, don't finish that sentence.
Two of them, and I've had a hard time getting into them. Do you have a recommendation for a follow-up to that? Because I feel like that's his best book.
Okay. Yeah. Well, have you read Jitterbug Perfume? Did you try that one?
I think I have it. I'll try it again.
God. Okay, well, that's my final word of wisdom. Read Tom Robbins. Don't listen to him about not being able to or just read.
Hey, Still Life with Woodpecker was an incredible book that was just this twisty, turny, crazy of a read that is amazing. And I
agree. Let's agree on that. Yes, that's my final word.
How can people best get a hold of you? What's the best way people could learn more about you?
Well, I suppose that they could learn more about me.
Sure, just look you up. I want to go to the internet and look you up. What do I do?
I think, if they genuinely want to learn a little bit more about me, I would go to the Big C site and go to my bio because that has like the bio stuff. If they want to see what I find visually appealing, they could follow me on Instagram, which is just A Generallo, spelled general with an extra LO. And then I'm still in the midst of getting my mark makers, which we didn't talk about, which is totally fine. But mark makers is a thing I'm doing, and I'm in the midst of getting a website up. So if they follow me on Instagram, they'll see a link on that eventually. And that'll be good.
All right, great. Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Brian, do you got anything else?
No, that's it. Just it was great talking with you and fantastic. I'm sorry we kind of went. I feel like we got off the track here and there, but it was still
but
amazing.
That's good, right? It's good.
That is good.
It's all about the journey, right? Exactly.
Yeah, it's our organic conversation. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you so much. This was really great, and I really do hope you do put out a podcast soon, because I'd love to listen to it.
Oh my God, stop pushing her.
No, she has to do it. Sorry, it's mandatory.
It's a mandate.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for the encouragement. That's super kind to say, and I really appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
We really appreciate you coming on. So a pleasure's on our end. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.